One, two, three, four.
You are listening to SKYLIT, the SKYLIT Books podcast. SKYLIT Books is a general interest bookstore in the Los Feliz neighborhood in Los Angeles. You can shop with us from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. or visit us online 24/7 at skylitbooks.com. Follow along at SKYLIT Books Instagram and Twitter. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening, and now on to the episode.
Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome back to SKYLIT. This is the SKYLIT Books podcast, and I'm your host, Hallie Perry. SKYLIT Books is an independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. We are open every day from 10 to 10 for curbside pickup and masked in-store browsing. You can shop online nationwide at skylitbooks.com. Today, we're welcoming John McGregor to read from his new book, Lean Fall Stand, out from Catapult. He'll be in conversation with Julia Phillips. John McGregor is the winner of the International IMPAC Dublin Literary Award, the Costa Book Award, the Betty Trask Prize, and the Somerset Maugham Award, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters E.M. Forster Award, and has been longlisted 3 times for the Man Booker Prize, most recently for his last novel, Reservoir 13. He is a professor of creative writing at the University of Nottingham, England, where he edits the Letters page, a literary journal in letters. Julia Phillips is the debut author of the internationally best-selling novel Disappearing Earth, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. A Fulbright Fellow, Julia has written for the New York Times, the Atlantic, and the Paris Review. She teaches at the Randolph College MFA program and lives in Brooklyn. Welcome, John and Julia. We're so happy to have you.
Hi, Hallie. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
John, thank you so much for being willing to chat with me today for SKYLIT Books. I'm a huge fan of yours, and it's such an honor to get to be in conversation. And
You're really welcome.
Oh, I'm very excited. Just as Hallie said, we're going to be talking about your stunning new novel, Lean Fall Stand, which The Guardian called a beautifully restrained interrogation of language, care, and loss. I love to hear how critics fawn over your work. I also love to hear how authors describe their work in their own words. So I'm really curious, how do you sum up Lean Fall Stand? What do you think this book is about? When you have to tell people what your new book is about, what do you say?
Okay, so when I tell people, I tell them it's about Antarctica, and it's about 3 men getting into terrible trouble and danger in Antarctica, because that makes it sound really exciting. And it's kind of the first book I've written where I can just say something really straightforward and exciting sounding in terms of what it's about. But actually what it's about is language and the failures of language, the loss of language in particular for one of the characters, but much more broadly, the kind of inadequacy and failure of language. And that was what it became about for me. But that is a bit less exciting to tell people. So I usually stick to Antarctica to start off with.
Well, it's nice that both are true. Both are exciting, maybe for different people, but one appeals more than the next, but they're both very exciting, and they're both so present in this book. And actually, speaking of language, your language is always so stunning and comparable. I wonder if you would mind reading a bit from the book for us.
Certainly. So I'm going to read a short piece from quite near the beginning of the book. So as I said, at the beginning of the book, we join 3 men who are working in Antarctica on a science research trip, and they have got into trouble. There's a storm has blown up, and the 3 of them have become separated, and we move between the perspectives of the 3 men in this first section of the book as things go from bad to worse. So this section is from the perspective of Doc. Doc is his nickname. His real name's Robert Wright. And he will become the main character in the book. Priestley Head was little more than a bump in the topography, really. It had taken 5 minutes to walk up from where he'd left the skidoo. The cliffs facing out to the Sound were barely 30 meters above the water, enough to add a little drama to Thomas's pictures. From here, the view of the whole valley was excellent. In the near distance, the red field hut of Station K sheltered in the lee of Garrard Ridge, and the peaks of K7 and K8 beyond. Below the field hut, the ground sloping down to the skiway, marked by orange fuel drums and black flags, and beyond that, the dark grey waters of Lopez Sound, fringed with fast ice. In the Sound, the icebergs had turned against each other, dipping and rocking with a sudden unexpected movement in the water. Doc had looked up towards Everard Glacier and seen a thick rolling shadow of banked clouds, a faint orange light, a surge of weather coming down towards them. It had come out of nowhere, and it had come in fast, the temperature dropping sharply. He'd seen Thomas glancing over his shoulder and trying to fold away his camera tripod, and when he tried the radio, there'd been no response. He'd seen Luke standing beside the skidoo, turning to look at him. He'd barely managed 2 steps towards the shelter of the slope before the wind slammed hard against him and pushed him back towards the edge of the cliff. He adopted a prone position, slipping quickly across the loose scree, scrabbling for a foothold and finding only thin air behind him. He stretched out his arms and tried to shift his weight forwards. He closed his eyes and concentrated. He arched one foot out and around to the left, bringing his knee up towards his chest. The noise of the wind was so violent it was difficult to think. His boot touched rock, finally, but when he pushed out against it, the rock loosened and fell down the sheer drop. For a long, giddy moment, his weight swayed away after it. He slowed his breathing. He concentrated. He inched his way forwards again. The cliff wasn't high, but he wouldn't survive a fall. His hands felt loose inside his gloves. The scree felt slippery beneath him. He could feel the edge of the ridge beneath his waist now, his legs hanging in the air. He pressed himself flatter against the rock, working his weight further forwards. His radio was in his inside jacket pocket and crushing against his ribs. He felt it vibrate. The other 2 would be checking in now, surely. He had no way to respond. He trusted them not to panic. They would shelter in place, as per the training. He had been in these situations before, and this was no different. You didn't go 30-odd seasons on the ice without getting into 1 or 2 scrapes. The trick was to slow down and start thinking. Always have the next step in mind. His next step here, obviously, would be to transfer his weight forwards and roll clear of the edge, before moving down into shelter and making contact with his colleagues. He took several slow breaths and made an effort to rationalize his thoughts. He flexed his fingers to maintain the circulation. You won't fall until you let go, a supervisor had told him once during crevasse training. The logic wasn't entirely sound, but the spirit was a fine one. Don't look down. Don't let go. Hold on. The trick was to hold on, always.
That's our cliffhanger, right? Will you forgive me if I make a bad pun?
It is exactly a cliffhanger. It was very deliberately and specifically a cliffhanger.
All right.
Somebody once said to me, I enjoy your books, John, but they're not exactly cliffhangers. And I kind of was determined then to write a literal cliffhanger.
I'm so curious about that determination. Okay, I've got so many questions for you, John. It's hard to sort out which to ask first, but I want to ask maybe then about exactly that and about what you said before, that your other books, in the past, you haven't been able to say to people, oh, there's this, big terrifying thing that happens and in Antarctica, and that gets them intrigued. And this one is different. In a couple interviews I read, you mentioned in the past being averse to big drama, that at certain points of your writing life, you're not looking for big drama. And then you were drawn to it for this book. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that choice to make this one different, that choice to have a cliffhanger. I have to say, to me, it feels totally consistent with your other work, and not like a, I don't know, like an aberration or something. It feels so right. It feels like a John McGregor book, and yet the way you talk about it is different now, and I'm so curious about that difference.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I've always, I think when I started writing, I instinctively, I don't know, I was instinctively drawn to characters and the way characters kind of brush up against each other, and their misunderstandings and their misconnections, and you know, the kind of, that kind of rich detail of life rather than plot. You know, I was never interested in plot. You know, I enjoy plot in other people's work. I just was never interested in constructing it myself. And I realized so I've been working on this book for a long time, or trying to work on it for a long time. And I had several versions of roughly this story of the three men isolated in a kind of remote part of Antarctica, getting into trouble and not being able to get themselves out of it. And all the versions I'd written before were kind of very detached, and they were kind of, you know, it was an old man in his shed in England writing his memoirs, remembering this thing that happened years earlier, you know, or it was people talking about it years later to each other. And it just occurred to me one day, like, if I've got Antarctica, which is dramatic and exciting and scary and dangerous, and I've got this story that I've conceived of them being in a dramatic, scary situation, why am I not writing it there in the moment? Why am I not kind of bringing the reader right into that situation? And I realized that it's kind of, you know, keep telling myself and other people that I'm, you know, not interested in plot and drama, and it had become a kind of a habit, you know, and a kind of safe space. So I became quite interested in challenging myself to kind of to write in a different way. But you're right. I mean, in the same, you know, underneath the drama, I'm still interested in, how do these three men understand each other? How do they talk to each other? What do they not say to each other? Where do they come from? You know, the kind of stuff I've always been interested in. So it's all still there.
What was it like when you decided to go into that dramatic moment, like a creative risk, but such an exciting one? How did it feel? Was that the moment that unlocked the story you've been working on for a long time, or was it just another phase in the long work?
It was the first of two moments that unlocked the book and enabled me to finish it. And it was really exciting and kind of fun, because I kind of kept escalating things. I was like, okay, there's going to be a storm, okay, and the storm, and they're not going to be able to see anything, and okay, and I'm going to have this. The ice is going to fracture. Okay, what else? There's going to be a leopard seal appearing in the water. You know, like almost literally a shark. You know, I just thought, why not? You know, these things are present, and this is the sort of thing I'm not supposed to do. I kind of told myself I don't do. So, okay, let's bring in the sharks. And it was a lot of fun. And it kind of came out of some stories I wrote for radio a few years ago after I'd written Reservoir 13. And I wrote them quite quickly. And they were written to be published as stories in a book, but they were also written for stories for the radio. And I suddenly realized that how different that is. You know, if you're listening to a voice, how much more clear and succinct the story has to be, and the information has to be. You know, when you're reading a book, you can glance back up the page and kind of check things and go back over them. And the listener to a radio program doesn't have that. And a listener to a radio program is quite likely to turn the radio off. You know, and I had this image in my head of my story coming on the radio, somebody at home not expecting to be listening to it, automatically reaching for the dial to change to a different station, and and I had to put something in that first sentence that would stop them turning it over. And once I'd done that, and they were kind of hanging around in their kitchen, not sure why they were listening to this, I had to kind of, almost every sentence had to keep their attention. And that was really new for me. I think I kind of relied on the fact that when somebody picks up a book, they're going to have that bit more patience and that bit more kind of tolerance. And so the stories had a really different energy for me. And I think I carried that into this.
That's the reservoir tapes that you're talking about, the experience of writing those.
Yeah.
For any excited podcast listeners out there who want to pick up your whole oeuvre. I'm sure I didn't say that word correctly. But it's such a challenging and exciting exercise. I remember an editor saying to me once that it was the chop the vegetables problem, even with reading, that you have to keep hooking the reader over and over again. Otherwise they'll say, well, yeah, I like this, but I've got something else to do. I've got to go chop the vegetables. I've got to go. There's something else that is calling my attention more urgently. So what a fun task to try to make it, to make your work demand for their attention most of all. Was that you said there were sort of two moments that unlocked it. Was that the second moment, the writing of those pieces for radio, or was there a different second?
Well, no. So writing the pieces for the radio made me go back to the Antarctic story and kind of recast it in this more kind of attention grabbing kind of not attention grabbing, but just to kind of honor the drama that already existed in the concept. The second thing was starting to think about stroke and about aphasia. So it's a minor spoiler, but I think it's kind of all over the back of the book anyway. Is that the storm that they're in? Not only is it incredibly dangerous, but in the middle of this storm, Doc has a stroke, and is airlifted out of the situation and recovers to some extent, and is brought back to England. And after his stroke, he's left with this condition called aphasia, which affects people's language in lots of different ways. And I don't really have, people ask me this, and I don't really have a coherent answer for why I connected Antarctica with aphasia, why I wanted this character to have a stroke and end up with aphasia. But once it had occurred to me, it made sense in all sorts of different ways, and it made sense of the struggle I'd been having to write about Antarctica and to use language to give a sense of Antarctica to the reader. I'd really struggled with that, and language felt kind of inadequate. And thinking then about aphasia and what that would mean to be always struggling for language just brought a lot of things into focus for me about communication in a broad sense and communication between people, and I kind of realized it's something I've always written about, is people kind of saying the wrong thing, or not getting their point across, misunderstanding each other constantly, and the idea of aphasia really kind of brought all of that into focus, and that was the second thing that really kind of turned an interesting writing project that had stalled repeatedly over the years into a book.
It's so fascinating to think about these subjects, this setting and this subject for you, because I think of whenever I read your work, I am bowled over by how perfectly every word is chosen. Every word is precise. Every sentence is precise. It's so extraordinarily crafted. When the craft is so good that it feels effortless, and you think it must have taken a lot of effort to make this feel so effortless, it just feels so right, every single word on the page. And so what a extraordinary challenge to write about in the first section, a place that is so isolated, and the second and third sections about loss of language, about, it's just so interesting to think about someone who communicates so well writing about these places where you can't communicate, or these states of the body where you can't communicate. It's really fascinating. And I wonder if writing about these subjects, as you wrote about Antarctica, as you wrote about aphasia, and as you worked on it for so long, did the process of working on it make you think differently about the words you choose, or the way that you use them? Did the project change you as a writer or as a speaker even?
It's really interesting. It changed me as a person, I think. I was initially interested in aphasia and stroke in quite a kind of, I want to say abstract, but not quite abstract, but in quite a detached way. It's not something that I've had personal experience of in my family, in my friendship circle. And so I was just kind of interested almost in a kind of technical way, what is aphasia and how does that work, and what's happening inside the brain, and what are the processes by which people manage to regain their language if they do. And it was very kind of dry, I guess. And then once I started doing research and talking to people, I was suddenly kind of horrified and terrified. They call it a stroke historically because it was seen as something that would just, it was God striking you down. It's so kind of arbitrary and so kind of random. And although there's tons of research about health factors that can predispose people to strokes, there's still a stroke can happen quite randomly to people of any age and any kind of health and fitness. So it was kind of terrifying to think about that happening to me, and to think about losing language in that way. Especially when it's my profession, it's my life, it's the way that I've filtered the world. I think a lot of writers get into writing because they like to spend the time choosing the right words, and often writers are not that great at conversation and then speaking fluently, and especially speaking publicly. I almost, sometimes you see a writer who's particularly good at kind of articulate public conversation, and I somehow don't trust them. It's kind of, I feel like I don't know, maybe I'm projecting, but I got into writing certainly because I was aware of being particularly bad at speaking, and was enjoying having the time to choose the right words. So I think that this writing project and the research that I did for it it just introduced me to a whole new world of people who are really kind of working hard to adapt to their new circumstances, their new situations. And I think aphasia is really interesting. It's quite an invisible condition, and I think one reason for that is that people with aphasia quite naturally retreat from the world to some extent. But also it's just not understood. And one really interesting thing I noticed once I was doing the research and kind of getting my head around the different manifestations of aphasia, I started noticing people in public, in shops and on buses, and the difficulties they were having in those exchanges I could recognize as aphasia. And I thought, well, okay, I've obviously seen these people before, and I didn't understand what it was I was seeing. So that was really interesting.
How incredible to work on a project that makes you see the world in a new way or notice things you never knew before. And that seems like the ideal. Not only did you write a beautiful book, but then you also get to have open eyes in a way you never did before. That is such a joy.
Yeah, but that's I think that happens a lot with writing, doesn't it? I think
that's the ideal. I think, but sometimes I don't know if this is, maybe you are wiser now. You've written more books and you know how it works. But I think often when I start a project, I think about the project and then I don't think about I think about what I'll make of the project and not about what the project will make of me, I guess, at the end. And it's only in retrospect that I'm able to see that both happened. So it's nice to hear about it.
Yeah.
I wonder. You keep going.
Well, I'm wondering if that has happened before. I think with my last 2 novels, I've definitely learned more about the world. They've been quite kind of research-driven novels, and so you naturally, and once you know things about the world, it looks more detailed, doesn't it? Like I'm quite sure if I got into bird watching properly and knew the names of all the different birds I could see and could hear, that I would notice more birds. Once you can name something, you it's easier to see it, I think. And
Yes.
and the research for the last 2 novels has done that. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm kidding myself. I mean, knowing more about the world doesn't necessarily make you a bigger person. But it's nice to know more
It
about the
doesn't make you
world.
smaller. It's probably better than the alternative, I think, to know something you didn't know before. And I always I think more and more that curiosity is the driver of art, driver of fiction, and the curiosity clearly, that you have that drives you to research, that leads you to tackle these challenges, take artistic risks that you haven't taken before. That is, it's translated to your readers. Like, we feel it when we pick up the book, how vivid and extraordinary the work is. So it's exciting. It's exciting to see how that curiosity sort of wrought into your material. I have a question about research, by the way. You mentioned research.
Okay.
And I know it's been a long project. It seems like the research has been going back at least, almost 20 years. You went to Antarctica in 2004, and you spent time with the Aphasia Nottingham self-help group. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about those experiences, those kind of experiences of immersion.
Yeah. So those, yeah. I mean, the Antarctica trip was 2004, so 17 years ago, and the going to the Aphasia self-help group was just in the last couple of years. And yeah, I'm a very different person. I was 2 very different people at those 2 ends of the scale, and 2 very different writers, I think. So when I went to the Antarctic, I went with the British Antarctic Survey, who were running writing residencies, writers and artists residencies, and I kind of applied for it on a whim just because I saw an advert for it and it sounded exciting. Didn't really expect to get it. Got it. Had never really been on any kind of residency before. Didn't really know how to proceed, how to kind of handle it.
What a first residency. You're really dipping your toes.
Yeah. It was in at the deep end for sure. And yeah, it was. I mean, it was just an incredible opportunity. I couldn't really believe that they were just going to take me to Antarctica. And it was, I mean, there were so many things I would have done differently if I'd gone several years later and kind of known more about myself and about writing, and about working with other people. And it was very odd. I mean, one of the odd things about the trip was that we never actually got to where we were supposed to be going. So we were on a research ship that was heading down to the main Antarctic base. And from that base, I was going to go off on a number of field trips. And so all my planning was around being on that base, and the ship, the sea ice was too thick for the ship to get through that year. So it spent about a week trying to get through this ice, kind of ramming backwards and forwards. And eventually they had to give up and turn back. And so I spent the whole time, about 5 weeks on the ship, thinking that we were just about to arrive. And then I was going to start doing my proper work. And then we never arrived. And suddenly I was on my way home and kind of felt like I'd squandered that time. But what happened was I was on the ship for 5 weeks and just spoke to everyone there, and, you know, got some insights into their work and their approach to their work. And, you know, especially people who've been there several times before, you know, it's such a particular place to work, and there's so much kind of, you know, people are very proud of working there and very nostalgic about the things that they've done and the place they've been, and they kind of, you know, they kind of know that it's such a kind of a limited opportunity. You know, they're going to go there, you know, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, and probably never go again. You know, I mean, Doc in the book has been going for 33 years. He's a kind of field guide. He's a kind of old hand, but I've got the impression that the majority of people who go there, you know, it's fairly time limited. So just talking to them about their ideas and their understanding of Antarctica as a place, and that was really interesting. That was what really stuck with me, and some of what I learned from those conversations fed into particularly the character of Doc and his kind of strange mix of nostalgia and puritanism and kind of his kind of self-perception as a kind of heroic self. But yeah, I mean, the amount of most of the research I did that actually fed into the book was done once I got home. You know, it kind of, it was a strange kind of slightly missed opportunity, but also an amazing one.
And then what about the self-help society group?
Yeah. So yeah, I kind of felt at this end of the scale that I kind of gained experience as a writer and a researcher, and got the hang of how you ask people the right questions and kind of help them to encourage them to open up. Because it's always really interesting whenever you're talking to people for research, I find they say quite reasonably, because people are busy, they say, well, what do you want to know? And I'm always like, well, I don't know yet. I'd like just talk for a bit, and something will sound interesting, which is not very helpful. So I kind of have learned to narrow that down a bit. But so when I started doing the research into the aphasia, I started with you know, the professionals. You know, I went to the stroke unit at the hospital. I spoke to the consultants. I spoke to speech and language therapists, and, you know, found out about their work and how that goes. And from there was then put in touch with this self-help group, and got in touch with them, and, you know, said, can I come along? And kind of expected just to go once or twice, but was encouraged to keep going, basically. And so this group was meeting once a month, maybe a dozen people, and about half and half people with aphasia and their partners or carers or relatives. And it was just like a conversation group, basically. They would kind of have a topic of the week, and they would, you know, very painstakingly have a conversation about holidays or music or gardening or books on one occasion. And it was a real breakthrough for me in my understanding of aphasia and my understanding of the characters that I was trying to write. You know, I'd already kind of sketched out some characters before I went to the group, because I didn't want to end up just importing those people into the book. But the thing that really made sense, having been to the group, was that aphasia is not a condition. It's the brain is incredibly complicated, and everybody's stroke is different, and the ways in which people's language is affected is incredibly various and various in very complicated ways. And so, everybody had a different way that their language had been impacted, and different challenges that they had, and different limitations, but also different ways of working around that, and different ways of coping with it. And the really striking thing for me was that I quite quickly felt like I was getting to know these people and getting a really clear sense of who they were, of their personalities, without necessarily having very much conversation. So we were exchanging meaning without exchanging meaning, and I found that really, really moving and just really fascinating. How much connection is possible with somebody when the language is not really doing the job. And then how much laughter there was in the meetings. That everybody was very quick to laugh and to make jokes and to wind each other up, and of course they were. And the thing I always forget until I'm reminded again the next time is so I was interested in these people because they had aphasia. In a previous book I was writing about people with addiction, and I was interested in them because of their addictions. But those people are not primarily concerned with their aphasia or their addiction. They're concerned with, do they want tea or coffee? What did they do yesterday? The thing that is of interest to other people is not their primary concern. And of course that's obvious, but you sort of have to see it again and again to remember it. And I think and that's really important in fiction. If you're writing about somebody, particularly if you're writing about somebody from beyond your own experience, that you don't make the thing that is other about them their primary characteristic, or even their secondary. Like it's the context for their life, and you're writing about their life within that context. And I think that in fiction, that's a really important distinction.
It reminds me of what you said before, that when you first learned about aphasia, or first started to go into it as a subject, it was like very heady. I know those weren't the words you used, but in the world of ideas, sort of more like a topic of research. And then in the group, you can be reminded again, this is life, and I feel it, and I occupy it, and I'm here, and they're here, and we're together, and we talk about different things, or don't talk about different things, or make jokes in different ways, and that movement from the kind of the head into the body, or the world of ideas into the actual physical, complicated world, is always such a thrilling one.
Yeah.
The group is so beautiful in your book, and to me, I loved every group section so much, the way their voices overlapped, because it's, I think, a showcase of a distinctive skill of yours, which is writing in that collective voice, writing, in the voice of the community in Reservoir 13, or writing in the voice of the street, and If Nobody Speaks of Remarkable Things. And I was wondering about that interest of yours, or that particular skill of yours, depicting an overlap of voices on the page, or depicting many different people in a moment, all of whom are distinct, and yet who are all also like of a piece with each other to create a whole. How do you do that?
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know why I started trying to do it, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I know. Okay, so two things. I've come to understand that I'm a lot more interested in group groups and communities than I am in families. And, classically, the novel has often been about the family as a kind of central social structure. And for some reason, that's never really interested me as a kind of narrative context. It turns out I've always been much more interested in bigger groups and groups that have just kind of been thrown together. And then I think before I even understood what point of view really meant, I was interested in how fiction can occupy lots of different points of view, and how easily you can bring the reader with you. As long as you kind of, as long as you somehow signpost it or somehow kind of give the reader a nudge or a clue that, okay, and now we're over here. We're with this. We're on this, sitting on this person's shoulder, or we're in their head, or we're some relation to them. And okay, hang on, now we're over here, and it's really easy to make those jumps just with some kind of shift in vocabulary or shift in kind of physical perspective. And one of the things I've always loved about reading fiction as well as writing fiction, at those moments when you know that something is happening that couldn't happen on TV or in a film, the moments when the kind of the time is slightly warping, or the physical perspective, or the voices that you're hearing, the consciousness that you're being given access to, those things can happen incredibly fluidly on the page, and I find that really exciting. And kind of it's kind of getting one over on TV almost. So I think I just kind of, I enjoy writing. I like writing, and I like having fun with writing, and I like kind of the kind of technical challenge of doing kind of slightly complicated, slightly intricate things. And I like trying to work out whether or not I'm bringing the reader with me, whether or not the reader is going to make those little shifts and jumps. So your question was actually how, and I don't quite know, but I just got to keep trying until it sounds like it might work.
I feel very satisfied with the answer of I don't know, and also I think that is an excellent answer. It reminds me of another question I have actually about the effect that you hope to have on a reader, or the feeling of will this reader come with me to this place? Will they jump with me? Will they make this leap? Will they go? I found the ending of Lean Fall Stand to be extremely moving, and moving in a way that for me felt so resonant with my experience of reading Reservoir 13, which in both I felt at the end very intensely this sense of, when I was thinking about it, the first word that came to mind was hope, but it wasn't hope. It was like acceptance and endurance, and the beauty of endurance in our lives, how precious it is to be alive, even when the experience of being alive is painful or complicated or shocking or abruptly cut short. Like, for the time that we have, whatever that time looks like, it's mundane and it's beautiful. And the feeling in both books was so strong to me. And then I was reading these interviews with you, and you were saying, I don't have some moral, ethical vision that I'm trying to impart to readers. And I wondered, I thought, does John intend to give me this feeling? Do you have this feeling when you write? Or are you trying to impart to readers something else? Or do you have a particular vision for how you want people to stand up and walk away from your books, what you want them to take from it? Or is it not that way for you?
I know with my first novel I did, and I kind of have been kind of running away from that tendency ever since. I think now I don't start off with a sense of what the reader's going to feel when they get to the last page. But I do have an instinct that I want them to feel something, and I want them to feel something meaningful that kind of makes a coherent sense of the book as a whole. And part of the writing process, part of the revision process at the end is finding that moment, finding that scene or that image that is going to make some coherent sense. I mean, I remember when I was writing my third novel, Even the Dogs, I had quite a detailed plan for the 6 chapters that this book was going to be. And I got to the end of the 5th chapter, and the last paragraph I wrote of this 5th chapter was so clearly the end of a novel that I just had to stop there. And I never wrote the 6th chapter. I just, okay, but this is obviously the end, and it's got that, whatever that mood is. And I couldn't necessarily articulate what that scene means or what the mood means, but it just kind of, for me, kind of ties the whole thing together. And I think with Lean Full Stand, I realized at some point, probably while I was working on those scenes with the group meetings, that I'd gone into this with hopefully only subconsciously, but at some level probably intending to write some kind of recovery narrative, redemption kind of narrative. Like, okay, he's had this terrible stroke and he's going to go to therapy and he's going to recover his language and get better, and and it's going to end up with him talking to his children or something. And as much as physical therapy and speech and language therapy is possible and productive and can achieve remarkable things, for a lot of people who have strokes, the damage that is caused will always remain. And a lot of therapy is about helping people to adapt to that and to find ways of living with their new situation. And as that became clear to me, it became really important. I wanted that to be the journey that Doc would go on, that he starts off wanting to fix himself, because he's spent his whole life fixing things. Things can be fixed, and so he just wants to do the therapy and get fixed. And I wanted his journey to be realizing that wasn't going to happen, and kind of adapting to that and learning new ways of living with that. And yeah, so I guess I wanted the reader to kind of go along there with him. So I guess that closing scene is something to do with acceptance, something to do with endurance.
Adaptation, I think, is a perfect way.
Yeah.
Adapting to what is.
Yeah.
Which is,
and there's something else in that last scene where that might be the moment when he dies. It could have been the moment when he died. And I think in that moment, he's kind of ready for that. And that felt important as well. But I don't know. It's for the reader to decide. It's the reader's book.
I think that's probably a perfect place for us to end, thinking about endings. John, thank you so much for this conversation. I think you said so much that I'm going to keep on thinking about over and over again. And thank you for your extraordinary book. It's just wonderful. And thank you to SKYLIT for having us.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us, John, and for your wonderful questions, Julia. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to go back and listen to this conversation over and over again. It was completely mesmerizing. Today's guests, once again, were John McGregor and Julia Phillips, and they were discussing Lean Full Stand, a novel. You can order your copy today at skylitbooks.com. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the SKYLIT Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylitbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.